Hey everyone, this is Edward back again for day 2, question 2 of my 205 philosophical questions challenge. Day 1 went okay, I guess. Had a few comments, had a few watchers, so that's not too bad. Perhaps my harsh truth that I uncovered there, harsh truth, that was hard to say even, it was a difficult starting point, so perhaps things can only go uphill from here. Although today, the question seems even harder than last time, so I'm a little bit worried, in fact, because today's question is free will real or just an illusion? So you can see I'm not exactly starting with the easy questions here. I'm just taking them in the order they are given to me, and yeah, this is a hard one. It's hard to even know really where to start. So I guess I would sort of walk you through my thinking, bring up a few sort of questions that I have as well, and you can let me know what you think. Certainly, well, maybe starting off with what do we mean by free will even? I suppose that we can make choices freely, right? that was a pretty useless definition. But we feel like we are consciously making these choices, nothing is affecting us, we're not being influenced by someone else, this is not a forced choice, right? If I want to have a drink, I can have a drink, right? Today I've got my tea with a little bit of gin to try and get my brain working even better than last time. Perhaps the umeshu was not enough for today, so today we're on gin and tea. This is green tea, if you're interested. So, did I make a conscious choice to drink my tea just then? Did I also make a conscious choice to put gin in the tea? And did I consciously add more gin than I needed to? Or did something else make me do that? And if something else made me do it, what was it? I think intuitively, most of us feel that yes, we have free will, because it's a very odd question or suggestion to say, well, if you don't have free will, what's happening, right? Are we robots, puppets, sort of marionettes of some intelligent species above us, or is that God? Or is it all just a random series of events that led us to where we are now? So, initial feelings of most people is, yes, of course we have free will. Of course, once you start asking questions about that, it starts to fall apart, I think. It seems to be built on not very firm foundations. We can attack that from a few ways, I think. Well, I may seem to have a choice now, but how did I even get here? Well, there was a series of events quite clearly that got me to where I am. I didn't just magically appear in this spot. If I did not have tea and gin in the house, perhaps I would not have made this drink, right? Was that consciously being chosen for me? So perhaps I can make a free choice given the range of choices available, but my choices perhaps have been limited by the events that happened in the past to get me to that situation. Could be. Another thing that I actually find quite scary, maybe some of you have heard of these experiments as well. People have put into an fMRI machine. It's something that can scan your brain while you're awake, and they can see what's happening in there. And they did a test essentially along the lines of something like, there's a pen on the table next to you. Whenever you want, just pick up the pen. Okay, so a pretty easy test. Just when you want to pick up the pen, you pick up the pen. And what the scientists found was, in fact, that something is happening in your brain below your consciousness that appears to be making that decision for you before you consciously make the decision. So you choose to pick up the pen after something else has chosen to pick up the pen. And then, in kind of a weird way, you reason backwards to say, well, of course I wanted to pick up the pen. Because I imagine it would be a very odd feeling if you really recognized that there was something else happening in your brain that you were not aware of that made you do that thing. So they have shown that this is happening. There is an action happening before your conscious mind is aware of it. So does that mean you don't have free will? I suppose in one way you might say yes, but I get a little confused here. If it's still in your brain, even if it's your subconscious mind, that's still you, right? So is there a sort of a different variation of you that's making that choice, or is it just you, right? I don't know that my brain is telling my heart to beat, but it's beating. And my brain and my heart are, in essence, me as well. Perhaps a little bit later we can get to the discussion of, is there something outside of me, or do I have a soul or something like that? But if we just look at it as a physical thing, the brain, the heart, it's all me, right? I'm not aware of everything that my brain is doing. Does that mean that I don't have free will? Or just that parts of my brain are working on things overtime or something like that to make things easier for me, to make my life easier, right? Why do I need to come up with some massive reason behind why picking up the pen? That part of my brain can deal with that and say, okay, now's the time to pick up the pen. And there we go. So I don't know if that got us any closer to the answer, but I think reasonable people might say, well, maybe you don't have 100% free will, given what we've seen so far. You've got the series of events in the past that limited your choices, that got you to where you are, and you do have that subconscious thing happening in your mind. So it is not 100% free conscious choice. So I think we can say that free will in its pure form is probably going away now. Another thing that I find quite interesting, and this relates actually to my last discussion about the harsh truths, where I'd said that one of them, most of your life is sort of based on luck rather than skill. The idea of luck or chance in your life, right? If I was born into a poor family, would I have had the choice to do the certain things I've done in my life, like go to school, get a master's degree? That is kind of a weird question, but it's true, right? I mean, if I was born in a poor family in Africa, it would probably be very, very difficult to end up where I was now. And likewise, if I was born a billionaire, again, my life would have probably been very different. So that sort of luck in life, that chance, right, this randomness of where you are, where you were born, is affecting the choices that I'm making. And that would appear to be taking away free will as well, right? Because I don't actually have a free range of choices depending on my situation. I may like, or I might wish to say, well, I'm going to buy Amazon, right? I choose to buy Amazon. I freely choose to buy Amazon, the company, right? But, I'm not Jeff Bezos. I don't have 170 billion or I guess $1 trillion is the worth of Amazon, the company. So this is not really a choice that I am free to make, however much I might wish it so. Yes, let's move on here. One of the resources I'm actually using for this talk is a guy called Sam Harris. He's quite an interesting guy. He's got a podcast, and he's written a book actually on free will. So I am leaning a bit on his thoughts. Although he actually is very extreme in his opinion, saying that we have no free will at all, which I admit I find quite uncomfortable. And certainly not everyone agrees with this point of view. And I think I am probably more along the lines of limited free will, and perhaps it's higher level things that we mainly focus on, right? Some of the questions that might come up with this, if we really don't have free will, well, then what does that mean for our lives? Perhaps it means nothing, right? I mean, would it change anything in your life if somehow we could prove to you that you don't have free will? I mean, what would that mean about your past and your present and your future? Certainly you can't change the past. Would you act differently in the future? I mean, that question doesn't even seem to make sense somehow, right? But people have argued that if we truly had no free will, then people would act immorally. I suppose this is sort of the situationalist argument that I was kind of making, that depending on the situation you're in, that affects the choices you're making. So if you knew, well, I suppose we're making an assumption here that if we all knew that you had no free will, you would then no longer be blameworthy for the actions you were taking. So if that was true, that you knew that you would not be blamed for example, killing someone, stealing something, or just not showing up to your job anymore, no one would blame you for that. So if that was true, then perhaps logically you would simply start doing those horrible things, right? Because if someone says, hey, why are you trying to kill me? And say, hey, no free will, not my problem. So perhaps we would, or not just we, all of society would collapse into barbarism and cruelty and, licentiousness and whatever large adjective you want to use there. Of course, people have made the same arguments about God, right? If we don't believe in God, how would we determine what is right and wrong? Of course, there is an issue or a crossover between free will and God, right? And Christians have debated this for a long time. If you know that you will be punished for acting badly, you will go to hell if you do X or Y or Z, how can you possibly make a free choice to act badly, knowing the terrible, terrible consequences of what you're doing? In that sense, perhaps it takes away your free will. Anyway, maybe that's getting slightly off topic, but there is the similar argument, right? No God, no free will, society collapses. It's an interesting argument, I think, because people do need to base their actions on some sort of moral code, right? And if we take away that ability to sort of rationalize our choices or to think through our choices and base them on some type of morality, perhaps some people at least would suffer or would actually do something bad. Is that the majority of people or the minority of people? I don't know. This kind of goes to something else that I was thinking. And Sam Harris actually makes a similar argument here. If there is no free will, should you tell everyone, right? In his case, in his book, he says, he brings up the question, would you tell your young child there is no free will, right? You have a 4-year-old girl, and she is sort of living her happy life, playing with her toys and things, and one day you sit her down and you say, darling, I've got some very good news, perhaps you could say, to tell you. There is no free will. So, assuming that she can understand what the hell you're talking about, is it a good thing to tell her, right? And I suppose the issue here is it helpful to tell her right now, right? I mean, what can she do with that information? How would that affect her behavior? Maybe she really is the type of person in the sense, because she's not able to think more complexly, that you are essentially saying, well, you're not going to be blamed for anything you do anymore. And so she will quite rightly then think, well, screw it, I'm going to do whatever I want, right? You can't blame me anymore. So every time she throws the food on the floor and I say, don't do that, she says, well, screw you, Dad, you can't blame me, remember, no free will. So this is, I think, a reasonable thing to say, or a reasonable criticism, not of free will, of free will or no free will, but of if it was true that we had no free will, perhaps this is something that you explain slowly over time. Just like Sam Harris uses this example, if his daughter is on an airplane, she's very happy to be there, she's super excited. He doesn't lean over to her and say, well, airplanes crash every day. Many, many people are killed, horribly killed, heads flying off, body parts all over the field, blood spraying everywhere. He doesn't say that, right? And And that's not something that you probably tell your 4-year-old child ever, right? But over time, we sort of slot in that information. So by the time you're an adult, we're all aware airplanes crash. Okay? We may like to ignore that fact, but we are aware of it. We know that's true. So could we take this idea wider? Sam Harris does not do this, but could we? Could we say, well, perhaps there are certain people we should just never tell, right? Perhaps that's the majority of people. Could society be made better by telling everyone they had no free will? I think probably it's not all that helpful. I think at best it would have no impact. At worst, it would have a negative impact, right? People would have that, well, there's no morality, I'm not blameworthy, I can do whatever I want reaction. Or they simply say, well, it feels like I have free will, so but I don't really believe what you're saying anyway. So it doesn't matter to me. Hard to say one way or the other there. But I do think there is probably, or perhaps I probably have a bias towards the sort of slow leaking of information over time for these types of difficult subjects, rather than thrusting it upon someone all at once, no matter what the age they are. Going back to the point I was just saying, though, is there no consequence, one way or the other, about the question, do we have free will or not? In fact, I would say there are positive consequences from the idea that we don't have free will, right? There is that issue of not being blameworthy. And we see this in the court system already, right? There are the trials for things where the person has got off from claiming insanity, right? That's a fairly old concept, but of course they have things like temporary insanity. It's like the example of the husband who comes home, sees his wife in bed with the next door neighbor and kills them both. Right? He was so angry he could not control his actions. And this type of thing has been considered a real thing, right? He was not making a free choice at that time. It certainly was not a rational choice. And it's continued to sort of move on from there. We've seen, at least in America, court cases where people have claimed, I had low blood sugar, right? I'm a diabetic or whatever. I had low blood sugar and it made me act crazy. I could not think things through properly. Or people use the, I had a terrible childhood defense, right? And I think more and more people are open to these types of excuses for the crimes. It may not excuse it entirely, but we don't look at them as being as blameworthy as we might otherwise. If that's the case, you might say we're on perhaps a slippery slope to accepting any excuse for the actions we take. And that may not necessarily be a bad thing. You can imagine that even though it's horrible when you know that someone has done something to you or to someone that you love, perhaps it's slightly less horrible if you knew that they couldn't, in a way, help doing it. That they're not evil in itself, that they are a victim of their own circumstances, their own DNA, their genes, their history, every part of the situation along the road. That might actually help us deal with these things a little bit more humanely. Or alternatively, we could figure out better ways of preventing these types of actions. Because it would, I think, get to a deeper understanding of why people do the things they do. If we just really think, this is almost like an economics point of view, right? They talk about the sort of super or hyper-rational human, right? It works great for their, data analysis and all their models, supply and demand and things like that. This rational decision-making. But that's not how people really are, right? So if we're able to look at these things as they actually are, I think that could be helpful. So, yeah. I got off a little bit off on a tangent there, but that's okay. Actually, time is going very fast this time. A few more thoughts I have. there's some common sorts of things that we've all experienced that is quite interesting that goes to this, like drinking alcohol, right? I got my tea and gin here. If I drink enough of this, or even a little bit perhaps, I change. I change a bit, right? If I drink a huge amount, I change so much I fall on the floor and fall asleep, right? These types of things, they are affecting me. They are changing me. They are taking away my ability, perhaps, to make a free choice. So is there something inside of me that is really in charge? Is there really a part of me that is making these choices? And that kind of brings us to the idea of the soul as well, right? Do I have a soul? Is that where my real rational decision-making, my real free will resides? Again, if that's true, it's kind of odd that by drinking alcohol or doing drugs or even getting a brain injury or just getting a concussion or something, these things can have a profound impact on my personality. You would think the soul would somehow be pure and untouched from these things. Of course, the alternative to this that I've heard that's kind of interesting, it's the idea of the body being essentially like a radio receiver, right? So essentially, like if you have a radio, perhaps in your house somewhere, you still have a radio, a physical radio. If you were to drop that on the floor, it may still be able to get a signal, but it's going to sound very strange, perhaps, right? Because the radio is damaged. I know some people, some philosophers, and perhaps more the people who are on the religious side of things might say, well, the body is simply like that, a radio receiver. And this explains why, alcohol, brain injury, whatever, the machine is damaged. The soul is still untouched. And the soul is still trying to send that pure message of free will, perhaps. But to me, this simply raises other questions, right? Where is the soul, and why is the soul, wherever it is, unaffected by whatever situation it's in, right? It still seems to be a victim of its own circumstances wherever it is, and who knows what else is happening there with, the soul. So I don't know if that helps. I also kind of subscribe to the idea of Occam's razor. The simplest explanation seems the best one for the most part. The idea of a soul transmitting itself from some undisclosed location starts to sound a bit fanciful, whereas we're simply just here in our bodies, and our bodies are us, has the ring of simplicity and perhaps truth to it. Let's see, what else shall I add for today? I think this one is almost like being a two-parter. Perhaps I will come back again and address this at some point. I think as a final thought here, I'll go back to the idea of the subconscious, like in the experiment I said at the beginning about the idea of choosing to pick up the pen and how something in your subconscious appears to be making that choice for you, and then your conscious mind is then rationalizing about why you made the choice. Out of all the things, I find this one, in a way, kind of scary. I can certainly think through, well, yes, subconscious, it's in my brain, it must be me. But it is a weird thought to think that, well, there's stuff going on in me I'm totally unaware of. I can kind of accept the fact that it's running my heart, right? That seems like a machine, okay, you flip the switch somewhere and the heart goes. But something that's thinking through stuff, right? That's moving me. I suppose it's moving my heart, right? But I don't know, it seems weirder moving my outside physical body. That somehow does feel somewhat scary. And, we have things like dreams, where, it's possibly our subconscious playing, or, some people say, well, maybe it's sending messages, like Freud and Jung. They always said this is the mind giving you a message or teaching you something. Where does that come from? That's quite interesting to me, and as I said, scary. Does it mean that we have no free will, or less and less free will? As I said before, yes, probably. So if you've made it this far, you're probably just as confused as I am. So maybe just to summarize again my own thinking here, I think it is the answer to the question, do we have free will or is it an illusion? I don't think it needs to be that cut and dry. I think we can say limited free will. I think evolutionary speaking, this makes some sense. We don't need to be wasting time on every decision, right? It makes sense that something would just choose that for us, the subconscious mind most likely. And then when it comes to more difficult things, where should I go to school? Who should I love? These things may be the higher consciousness things that you are thinking through, that you are considering. I will admit that you are still kind of a victim of circumstance, right? I don't live in Africa, so I am probably not going to be choosing a girlfriend from Africa unless I go to Africa. Whereas I'm in Asia, so I have an Asian wife. This certainly limited my choices, but I think I did, in a way, make a free choice from the choices I had. Certainly my wife would hope so, right? So, limited free choice. That is the answer to the question, do you have free will or not? Perhaps that's a disappointing answer to some, but I think it's probably better to face the truth and move forward to some sort of deeper understanding of your life based on that, than to just ignore it, right? Yes. So until next time, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to subscribe, and I will see you next time.